Welcome, everyone! Today, we are diving into an incredibly profound explainer based on a fascinating text, The Digital Genesis, A History of Computing. Just sitting with that title for a second, you can really feel the gravity of it, right? It promises this sweeping, epic narrative about the very dawn of our modern technological era. Now, I know you all love getting straight to the core of complex topics, and, well, that is exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to unpack the true meaning behind this concept and see how it fundamentally frames the tech-driven world we live in.
So right out of the gate, we've got to tackle a massive question. What does it actually mean to experience a genesis in the digital age? I want you to really think about your own personal place within this giant concept, because we aren't just talking about some linear timeline of cool inventions or a list of dates when flashy new gadgets dropped. No, we're talking about a fundamental, completely irreversible shift in human history, a true beginning. When you boot up your laptop or, pull a file from the cloud, you're actively participating in the ongoing ripple effects of this very genesis. It kind of forces us to look at our everyday tech habits, not just as using tools, but as being part of this much grander historical continuum.
Let's look at the concept of genesis itself. Notice the author didn't go with something safe like the start of computing or the early days of tech. The word genesis carries some incredibly heavy, almost biblical ambition, doesn't it? It implies something massive, manifesting out of nowhere. It suggests a hard, unmistakable dividing line in the sands of time, a very strict before and an after. By framing computing history this way, we're signaling that this isn't just some dusty engineering footnote. It's literally a foundational creation story for modern humanity.
To put it simply, a genesis in this context represents an absolute origin point, a totally new dawn. To put that into perspective, think about other monumental shifts in our history. The dawn of agriculture, that completely changed how humans interacted with the earth and built societies. The Industrial Revolution, it fundamentally rearranged the tectonic plates of global production. Elevating computing to that exact same level means we're recognizing it as an equal turning point. The history of computing, seen through this lens, is the story of how a completely new dimension of reality was essentially spoken into existence. And that brings us to the second piece of the puzzle, digital. When we take the word digital, which is really the translation of our complex, messy, physical reality into clean data, into binary code, those millions of invisible ones and zeros pulsing through our devices, and we combine it with Genesis, we get a framework that is just mind-blowing. We're talking about the creation of a world governed not by biology, not by geology, but by pure mathematics and logic. It sets an impossibly high bar for the history we're exploring today, prepping us for a sprawling epic of technological creation. Okay, but here is where we have to pivot. We've built up these incredibly grand expectations based on the title. So what actually happens when we crack open the source text we're analyzing today? After such a majestic buildup, how does the document actually chronicle this monumental origin story? Well, brace yourselves, because the stark reality of the text takes us in a very unexpected, highly minimalist direction. The excerpt we're given is exactly 3 words: history of computer. That's it. No punctuation, no capitalization, just raw text. Instead of this sprawling, multi-volume encyclopedia detailing every single gear and microchip, we're basically handed a fragmented, primitive search query. It is entirely stripped of narrative. But, rather than seeing this as a letdown, think of it as a blank canvas. It's practically demanding that we fill in the history ourselves. It acts as a prompt, inviting us to do the heavy lifting of uncovering the epic story hiding behind those 3 simple words. When you compare the two side by side, the contrast is just wild. On one hand, we've got the lofty, grammatically perfect, majestic title, The Digital Genesis, A History of Computing. It's an absolute masterclass in academic framing. And then, right next to it, we have this basic query, History of Computer. It honestly reads like someone typing their very first thought into an early internet search engine. It's stripped of all its armor, leaving just the raw, primal components of the idea. And since the text strips things down to the absolute basics, let's accept that invitation. Let's actually answer that query together right now and dig into the true origins this text points toward. So why reduce such a massive digital genesis to just 3 words? Well, maybe it's because the true genesis wasn't actually a giant, clunky machine at all. It was a simple, profound idea. Let's rewind to the 1840s and talk about Ada Lovelace. While everyone else at the time looked at early mechanical prototypes and just saw glorified calculators meant to tally up numbers, Lovelace was different. It was like a visionary architect looking at a pile of bricks and seeing a cathedral. She realized that if a machine could manipulate numbers, it could theoretically manipulate anything those numbers represented, like musical notes or letters of the alphabet. She wrote the very first algorithm intended for a machine, basically planting the very first seed of the history of computer.
Now, if Lovelace planted the seed, Alan Turing built the root system. Stripping it down to the core, we hit Turing's brilliant theoretical concept from the 1930s, the universal Turing machine. To really grasp this, imagine a master chef with an infinite recipe book. This chef doesn't just know how to bake one specific type of cake. They can bake absolutely anything in the universe as long as they have the exact right sequence of instructions. Turing proved mathematically that a single machine could compute any computable problem. You didn't need a different custom machine for every single task. He effectively gave the history of computer its theoretical brain. And then that theoretical brain had to become physical metal. Enter the ENIAC in the 1940s, the true hardware genesis. When we define computer here, forget that sleek, pocket-sized smartphone you have. The ENIAC was a calculator literally the size of a gymnasium. It weighed roughly 30 tons, packed with thousands of glowing vacuum tubes that threw off immense heat. And programming it, there were no touchscreens here. The operators, many of whom were brilliant pioneer women in the field, had to physically plug and unplug thick black cables, kind of like old-school telephone switchboard operators routing calls, just to run a single complex calculation. That was the gritty, highly physical reality of our digital genesis. Bringing this all together, we see the true essence of origin. The most complex systems in human history started with these relatively simple, sequential concepts. Our digital genesis wasn't magic, and it certainly didn't happen overnight. It was Ada Lovelace's brilliant algorithms, giving the concept a soul. It was Alan Turing's universal recipe book, giving it a logical brain. And it was the massive, cable-tangled 30-ton ENIAC, giving it a physical body. So while that raw query, history of computer, might look super minimalist on paper, it actually holds this incredibly rich, deeply human story of problem-solving and visionary engineering. Which leaves us with one final provocative question. If Lovelace, Turing, and the ENIAC operators wrote our digital genesis, what comes next? You are alive for the chapters that are being written right now. As we sprint into the eras of artificial intelligence, quantum processing, and spatial computing, what is the next evolution of this history of computer going to look like for you in your day-to-day life? Keep questioning, keep looking for the roots of the tech around you, and never stop anticipating the next massive leap. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.